I'd like to welcome everyone to our topic tonight. I hope you'll find it helpful for understanding components of diet that you can use to help people optimize their thyroid function. As people know by now, if you've attended some of our other webinars, when we apply our principles of our metabolic code programs, of course, we're not just focusing on weight loss, but weight loss or weight management is one of the key components that we're hoping to achieve. And but it can be used for many different types of conditions and just for optimizing health in somebody who doesn't necessarily have a condition. But as any practitioner knows, one of the common things that we encounter today with our clients are problems with thyroid symptoms. And so the metabolic code diet and programs focus on addressing the common issues that we have going on today that are influencing people's health and disease risk, like insulin resistance, gut-related conditions and problems, and how different components and lifestyle factors affect those, affect our health, especially things like stress, things like toxicity from the environment. And one of the big key core things that we assess and address with metabolic code programs is we make sure to do a good assessment of thyroid function, because it's been a problem for a number of years that people are going around with thyroid symptoms, and very often it's not getting addressed just because of the way that thyroid labs are read by conventional medical practices. And so it's one of the big areas that we look at, and we try to help practitioners realize ways to help people optimize thyroid function when they have thyroid symptoms. And we've taken this approach to health for years. It's nice because finally a few years ago, a consortium on obesity and weight management decided that it was time for everyone to start looking outside of the box and not just focusing on a calories consumed versus calories expended with exercise approach, that we need to look further at things like endocrine disruption, and of course thyroid is key for that. So with our diet, we're not just trying to take a fast, low-calorie way to control weight. We want to prevent side effects from things such as muscle loss that occur on calorie control diets. And yeah, so every diet we're trying to prevent disease, we're trying to control weight, but if you can't prevent side effects in the process, then you've done more harm than good. But we also do other things, like we try to look at making sure that we're paying attention to the immune system, and of course that's where the gut health comes in, and that way support overall optimal health. So I don't want to belabor this point too much. We all, as practitioners of different types, know that thyroid function sets our basal metabolic rate and therefore influences the energy production capabilities of our body. So that's really what we're trying to do with thyroid function, is we're trying to get every mitochondria in the body efficiently producing ATP molecules and maximize that as much as possible. And therefore, because it's so based to so many different areas of health, it's not just our weight and it's not just our feeling of having some energy, it's fueling every activity in the body, because every activity in the body relies on ATP production. And if we don't have good thyroid function, we're not going to have good ATP production. So therefore, it can affect many, many different areas of health. For example, one of the things that is not often thought about is digestion. And in fact, one of our very own dietitians had this issue. She was experiencing a lot of stomach pain with eating after eating, and we were looking a lot of different directions, and did not realize until finally further workup revealed that it was a low thyroid issue that was affecting the stomach acid production. And once the thyroid was addressed, the discomfort with eating largely went away. But in all areas, including neurotransmitter production and our mood and our nervous system. So it's not just neurotransmitters. T4 hormones stimulate our vagus nerve, which influences peristalsis in the gut. So when thyroid function is low, that's one of the reasons people can have constipation symptoms. So these are all the symptoms that we look for and we assess. And of course, the number one thing that tells me something must be going on with thyroid, whether it's directly thyroid or thyroid being affected by something else, is that stubborn weight that is just so hard to get off, anything past maybe 4 or 5 pounds, and even when people exercise. And in fact, I just got another, we got another patient this week that was this very scenario where the weight started coming on, and even with increased exercise and really a good amount of exercise, weight just wasn't moving. So stubborn weight is key, but low energy is also key, and the fatigue. And then we'll see the other things that are fairly common, like dry skin, although it doesn't always become real pronounced. It's usually there somewhat. It can contribute to depression, thinning hair, thinning eyebrows. And then another real key symptom, the cold hands and feet. And as I mentioned, constipation. I thought not sweating is something that we don't often think about. And I was kind of reviewing symptoms today, and I thought, you know, I'm going to bring that up because thyroid was an area for me that needed supported, and I just did not sweat. Finally, I sweat easier. Another thing is swollen eyelids, you know, the heavy upper eyelid that looks a little swollen. And as I already mentioned, poor digestion and things like slow speech and lethargy. When I think of low thyroid, I can't help but think of the show Honey Boo Boo, and that poor girl's mom. Every time I look at her, I just thought she is just screaming low thyroid, and how unfortunate that nobody has yet, talked to her about it or addressed that as a health practitioner. But you can just see the heavy eyelids, the slow speech, and of course the weight issues. But so how do we support the thyroid? Well, there are a number of nutrients that are super important for thyroid hormone production because they actually just provide the raw materials for the substances to get made in the body. And then we have other nutrients that are needed to help convert T4 to T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone. Since not all thyroid problems just come strictly from an overall low thyroid hormone production, in fact, the biggest cause of, the biggest category of thyroid disease is autoimmune thyroid or Hashimoto's thyroid. We cannot think about thyroid or think about assessing or addressing thyroid issues without addressing immune balance and immune health. It's key, and it affects a lot of people. And then we have other issues with our foods that can come into play, things like goitrogens in foods and toxicity of foods. So let's dig in. You know, I didn't want to get into thyroid without being sure to mention that there are so many other factors that can affect thyroid. And if you're out there doing metabolic code assessments and reports, you realize that there's huge interplay between things like stress. Stress down regulates the production of T4 to T3. Sex hormone balance and impacts it. If a person is estrogen dominant, that increases thyroid binding globulin. If they don't have enough progesterone, that affects that estrogen dominance ratio, but also influences T4 to T3 conversion. One of the ways progesterone is thought to maybe help this process is because it might be aiding zinc and potassium absorption. So there are many other areas that have to be assessed in order to properly address thyroid. So one of the first things that we do is if a person shows signs and symptoms of chronic stress and they have dysregulated cortisol, we know that we have to balance that in order to also then finally get the good thyroid function in the body. And the same thing with sex hormones. We like to assess that to see if that could be influencing. So there are many other areas that need to be addressed, and insulin sensitivity is one of them as well. So, and the gut health. Oops, I'm sorry, this is sensitive here. So this is just showing the fact that, you know, thyroid hormone conversion is affected by cortisol. So you see here, this chart shows for T4 to get converted to T3, one of the key nutrients you need is selenium. Selenium activates the 5-deiodinase enzyme that takes off one of those iodines and gets that hormone converted to T3, which is the most active form, the form that attaches to thyroid hormone receptors on cells and gets all the processes of the cell started in motion. However, if we have elevated cortisol, we subvert that process, and rather than the T4 getting converted to T3, it gets converted to RT3, which is an inactive form that blocks receptors and stops thyroid hormone activity. So you can see how important that total workup is. And when we do a thyroid lab workup, we encourage testing not just TSH and not just TSH or T4, but testing free T3 and T4 as well as total T3 and T4, so you can see, does the body have enough of the active form of thyroid hormone, which means are we getting conversion? So there are situations where the body can be making adequate amounts of T4, but if T3 is very low, the person can still have thyroid symptoms. And then it's extremely important to assess the thyroid antibodies, the TPO, and the thyroglobulin antibodies. And now we're learning more roles for substances like cysteine and leucine, so some people are even adding those to their lab workups. So let's dig in here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to address if the people are positive for TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies, that means they have autoimmune processes going. So that's the first area I want to address, and because this is the most common form of, you know, a thyroid disease, as I mentioned, we need to know what we do in people when they have autoimmune thyroiditis. And this is intricately linked with gut health. So I don't want to turn this into another big gut health lesson, but for those of you that may not have a lot of background on this, I just kind of want to show you the progression from imbalanced immune reactivities in the intestinal tract and the progression to autoimmune conditions. So we know that in order to have healthy mucosal linings in the intestines, we need a good amount of mucin production, and that mucin comes from the fact that we have good amounts of probiotics and beneficial flora in our intestinal tract. And we also know that this process of healthy production of glycoproteins, mucin production, etc., all the immune processes are directed by probiotics, but it can become disrupted by prescription drug use, recreational drug use, alcohol, poor diet. It can shift and kill off probiotics, antibiotics especially. Stress can heavily influence the microbiome. So there's this is where it starts, is something happens that dysregulates this probiotic organisms in the intestines that synthesize butyrate, which is important for feeding the epithelial cells that are lining the intestines. That's what they use for fuel. And if we do become dysbiotic, then what we can have happen is that overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria or yeast can put out toxins that can cause the intestinal linings to deteriorate. And also, if you just don't have enough probiotics to keep synthesizing fuel for those cells, that can contribute to die-off of those cells. And the immune system starts to become dysregulated because what happens is probiotic organisms direct the production of tight junction proteins, the occludins. And zonulin is a substance that will temporarily break down those occludins for the purpose of the immune system being able to reach through those gaps between cells and take out any problematic substances that are coming through in the intestines, whether it's bacteria or whatever. So we can start to get disrupted tight junction proteins, and that allows the immune system to start to become more active, or drives it into becoming more active. And so when we start to have dysregulation here, the T cells will start to react to things that are benign, but they don't realize it because they have proteins that are similar to bacteria, so it'll start to react to dusts and molds and food proteins. And what happens is we get into an imbalance between our acquired immune side and our innate immune. And so the Th2 activation is what is seen in autoimmunity. So this is the balance between Th1 is your innate immunity and Th2 is your acquired immune side. And you see that this slide put in cortisol and DHEA to show that that is a big influence in this as well. And that's how stress can start to upregulate this, cause imbalance in this immune response in the gut. So what happens is it's definitely a teeter-totter. If one side of your immune becomes more active, the other side goes down and becomes less active. The acquired immunity, the Th2 side, is the side that is your immunoglobulins, that are the substances that react to bacterias, molds, dust, and foods that come through in the intestinal tract. So you start to get a big upregulation of all this immunological defense, including histocompatibility complex, all these things that that Jim teaches in depth about, that causes, what happens is when you get an upregulation of these HLA peptides, those are what get recognized by the T cell receptors in the intestinal mucosa. So that's a key step, and this is a key thing that is what causes autoimmunity. So this is the progression. It's a dysregulation of probiotics and the linings of the intestines, the breakdown of the tight junction proteins, and the formation of these immune defenses that starts to upregulate and cause this tendency towards autoimmunity. Other substances that have an influence in this process, in particular, are things like histamine. I'm going to talk a little bit about. The interleukins definitely cause damage to cells, and interleukin-6 in particular can cause pain, and so that's why people with irritable bowel milieu of conditions can have double over with pain after they eat, because their body is making too much interleukin-6, that's a byproduct of that immunoglobulin activity. This is a huge slide. I don't want to go into all this, thank goodness. I just want to show that at the center of a lot of symptoms that can occur from this are all the problems that can happen from the production of too much histamine in this process. And if you look way over, eventually you see that what I just mentioned, things like diarrhea, stomach cramps, etc. So how does histamine come into play? Histamine, when it gets produced, there is a substance in the gut called diamine oxidase that should be there to break it down. But when you're having an overactivity of the immune system in the gut, you can get a way overproduction of histamine. And therefore, your body can't keep up with breaking it down because the diamine oxidase can get all used up. And when you don't have enough diamine oxidase, you lose your tight junction proteins. So that's the gap showing there between the cells, and what that process leads to then are these many symptoms that can occur as a result of all this. The gut symptoms themselves, the allergies or food sensitivities themselves, immune, people noticing that they don't have the Th1, the innate side that fights viruses and things like that, so they become, they notice they get sick more often and can really influence mood. So this is kind of a synopsis, but what can happen then is because you lose those tight junction proteins, you can get migration of protein peptides and different substances from foods and, you know, from the intestinal lumen into the bloodstream, and therefore into it can migrate and lodge in tissues of the body. And this is a nice graphic to show what the tight junction proteins kind of do. They block that between cell uptake and force things to get absorbed like they're supposed to through the villi. But if they're broken down because we don't have enough probiotics directing their production, or we have things like too much histamine breaking down those tight junction proteins, then all these substances are able to permeate through and cause that immune system to flare up and go, you know, because the immune system resides right underneath of these and is ready to attack, and it's for our protection. So what I want you to see here is, if you can look at the little blue triangles, these are the peptides that are managing to get through the cells. You can see there between intestinal cells, we've lost tight junction proteins, and there are substances getting through. So you see, if you look at the little yellow numbers, number 1 showing the things that influence this process, and number 2 showing that you're getting the formation of your immunomodulatory fragments of proteins and things, and then you get the tight junction proteins getting broken down and opening. And then look to your left, number 4. So that's the dietary peptides coming through, and what goes on. So they get complexed with things, the antigen-presenting proteins, and they present these substances to the immune cells. And the immune cells say, wonderful, I'll be glad to attack these things. So that's when you get the production of the B cells, which are antibodies. So you can even form antibodies against your own tight junction proteins. So it becomes quite a process going on here. This is how it all works with the immune system in the gut. And this just shows how the Th1 and Th2, the different inflammatory cytokines that get released when these cells are active and attacking things, because this is what they use to attack those substances. They use the inflammatory cytokines. So what is upregulated in autoimmunity is the Th2 side, so on the right, And so all those cells are secreting these different inflammatory cytokines, IL-4, IL-6, IL-10, TNF-alpha, and an overproduction of these Th2 side is what leads to autoimmune and allergic conditions. So it's this whole gut health or gut breakdown process that is involved in autoimmune thyroiditis. And this is a slide here that shows another impact on this is that the fact that these tight junction proteins are zonulin dependent. So zonulin is a substance that breaks down tight junction proteins. So when it gets overproduced, that's another factor that can break down tight junction proteins. It's not just histamine. So it was one of the first substances that got focused on in this issue of what's come to be called leaky gut. And this will, you'll see why this is important in a minute. So suffice it to say, what I want you to know here is this is the process that whereby gut health affects us and can drive us towards a lot of different conditions and problems. So the autoimmune thyroiditis itself is just one thing. Sometimes if people have one autoimmune condition, it's very common to have more than one at the same time. So as this starts to progress, you'll start to see things like Sjogren's syndrome developing or arthritis. You'll also see telltale signs, and these are the things that we look for as a clinician when we're screening to see if people possibly have this process going on. A real common thing is for people to develop hay fever, seasonal allergies, conditions like asthma, and also chemical sensitivity. So we always ask, do you get a headache from smelling perfume, or do smells give you headaches or bother you? That's another telltale sign. So the key thing that you do with diet for autoimmune thyroid is that you end up having to do a low allergen diet, because there are substances in food that affect these things that break down tight junction proteins. So you can see here, gluten causes increased production of zonulin, and it causes it in everybody. The difference between whether you'll have a problem from gluten-containing grains, and they're trying to figure out why some people have an increased response compared to others. Some people, the zonulin will increase, and you'll get a short time where you have the tight junction proteins broken down, and you have a little bit of a gut permeability, but it goes away quickly. And this is according to Dr. Alessio Fasano, who is the eminent researcher on this topic. But some people, when they eat gluten, their body makes a ton of zonulin, and the effect lasts for a really long time. And so those are the people that are going to be more impacted when they eat gluten-containing grains. In addition, I don't think a lot of people know that soybean agglutinin can upregulate zonulin. Now, with cow's milk, it's not necessarily a zonulin issue. It tends to be more in the research. What you see is that the casomorphin, which is a substance in cow's milk, directly causes the production of histamine. And same with peanuts. There are several proteins in peanuts that trigger this histaminic response. So eating these allergenic foods can be more problematic for some people, especially in the instance of wheat. But these are substances that are known to do these things. So diet can drive the tendency toward this problem. So if somebody lives on cow's milk, for example, and constantly having that increased production of histamine, that alone can eventually cause the breakdown of those tight junction proteins and start to cause this upregulated immune response. So just how much you eat of certain of these allergenic foods could have an influence. But for somebody who already has an autoimmune process going, such as in autoimmune thyroiditis, it is critical to cut down the intake of these allergenic proteins from foods so that we can get the tight junction proteins up regulating again. We can start to rebuild by slowing down the cytokine production from those antibodies, from those immunoglobulins that are breaking down intestinal tissue. It's like the innocent bystander. The immunoglobulins are trying to attack that protein and kill it, but those chemicals don't just target that protein. They are blasted out, and anything that's in the way can be damaged. So that's how our intestinal cells can break down as a result of all this. And how you get to slowing down this immune reactivity that causes this problem is take these allergens out of the diet. Well, how does this involve the thyroid? Basically, what it's thought is that because those peptides go through those between the intestinal cells and get into the bloodstream, they travel then in the blood and they lodge in certain tissues. And thyroid gland is one of them that's prone to it. So is our heart, is prone toward problems from lipopolysaccharides that can come through the intestinal tight junction, the gaps, between cells. And so you now have this complex in your actual tissue of your body. As your immunoglobulins travel through the bloodstream, they'll target this immune attack wherever the protein is. So if it's in the thyroid gland itself, those cytokines then damage the thyroid gland. And that's what causes the inability of the thyroid to be able to make adequate thyroid hormones, because there's this whole immune process going on that's actually damaging that gland. So for autoimmune thyroid, low allergen diet is critical, and elimination of the common allergenic, high allergenic foods. And what a lot of people don't understand is what makes a food an allergenic food is the structure of the proteins in the food. And some foods have a lot of, the food scientists know the allergenic proteins. And in fact, it's interesting, when GMO foods first were being produced and used, they weren't testing the foods for allergenic proteins. Now they do, because in early days they had some problems with some of the foods having high production of, or high content of allergenic proteins. So that's why wheat is a highly allergenic food. It contains a lot of allergenic proteins. So these are proteins that are structured that similarly to some proteins in bacteria, and our immune system responds to them. So gluten, when we say the immune system is responding to gluten, it really isn't responding to gluten itself. It's responding to the gliadins or the agglutinins that make up gluten. Soy, so when we're eliminating, when we're trying to get gluten out of the diet, we need to eliminate wheat, rye, and barley and anything that contains them. And that can get a little tedious. For example, malted barley is a sweetener that can be used in foods. In fact, it's an ingredient in Rice Krispies. So when they say, now we've made Rice Krispies gluten-free, they mean, well, there never was wheat in them, but there was malted barley. They took the malted barley out, and that's how they make it gluten-free. When we're dealing with people with autoimmune thyroid versus clients that have a very, very extreme sensitivity to gluten, such as in celiacs, we really don't need to be quite as nitpicky on every ingredient. For example, a person with celiacs has to eliminate oatmeal. But for this condition, we don't find that it's necessary to eliminate oatmeal. Why? Well, oatmeal is not a gluten-containing grain. What happens with oatmeal is that it can become cross-contaminated when it's being processed in the granaries, and you can get very minute amounts of wheat that cross-contaminate into that oatmeal. A celiac person can be very sensitive to even that small, minute, sometimes parts per million amount. And but in autoimmunity, we find that if we get the gross amounts out of the diet, the large macro, nutrient amount, grams amount, if we get that out, that's usually adequate. Soy is highly allergenic food as well. So it will be not just in vegetarian products like soy burgers and patties and, textured vegetable proteins and things like that. But you really have to look for soy now in things like your soy proteins added to, protein bars or snack bars, soy protein in shakes, and of course then just anything that's made with soy like tofu and tempeh. And now edamame is pretty popular. And we take cow's milk out as well. Now, the metabolic code diet that we have on our lifestyle guidance portal, we go ahead, because of the way it worked out, we don't have corn in the initial phases. We took peanuts out as well. So we have all of these foods out in addition to those. And then we have egg-free versions as well, because eggs can cause problems in some people. So in the metabolic code diet, the measures that support healthy thyroid are the fact that we take the allergens out, the fact that we downregulate our carbohydrate content, because there's I didn't get a chance to get into it a lot, but there's a lot of interplay between thyroid and insulin resistance issues. So if a person is insulin resistant, that thyroid binding globulin can increase and become a problem. So, but we have to watch, because we don't completely eliminate starchy foods, such as happens in a diet like a paleo diet. The reason being, we really have to protect gut health, and if you've sat in on some of my other seminars, you realize that they've learned that one of the biggest components that contributes to our body being able to have healthy populations of probiotics is the fact that we eat resistant starch. Resistant starches are starches that do not break down in the digestion, and therefore they travel and make it to the large intestine, where most of our probiotics reside, and become food for those organisms, and they just thrive. And when they're thriving, they're making us healthier by feeding those intestinal cells that have different functions, such as the production of glucagon like peptide, and the production of important satiety hormones. So resistant starch is key. So we want to take the edge off of that carb production to regulate our insulin sensitivity and improve it, but we've got to protect gut health. So we kind of have a modified version of like a paleo diet, where we allow beans and legumes because they're one of the primary sources of resistant starch. So we have education in our materials about not being careful to make sure to get sources of resistant starch and not eliminating those completely. For example, if a person decides they're just not going to eat bananas because it's a higher carb, a high glycemic fruit. So what are our areas of potential risk? Well, as you know, on the metabolic code diet, I hope some of you know this, but if you don't, what we do is we promote the that people eat a lot of vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. Well, those can be sources of goitrogens. So what comes up is, can you overdo it and eat too many vegetables and take in too many goitrogens, and in that way affect the thyroid? So let's talk about goitrogens. Goitrogens are foods that contain compounds that interfere with iodine uptake. And the high goitrogen foods, number one is millet. Soybeans are high in goitrogens, cabbage family vegetables, greens, flax seeds, peanuts, root vegetables. So I'm meaning by that things like turnips and rutabagas, trying to think, sweet potatoes. Pears and peaches are a couple of fruits that happen to be higher in goitrogens. So if you're eating an awful lot of these cabbage family vegetables, which people are told to do for cancer prevention as well, and a lot of our greens for a wonderful alkalinizing, nutrient-dense food, is this going to interfere with thyroid hormone production? Well, there are a couple of points here that will make you feel a little better. If you cook the foods, that denatures the goitrons in the foods. So the cooked foods, the goitrogens are much reduced, and that helps us out. So this is one point where we can say, well, it may not always be better to have a high raw food intake, for sure. And especially another thing to think about, you may not be on a raw diet, but intake of fruit and vegetable juices in the juice bars that are so popular and that are exploding everywhere. And I'm all for people getting a fresh vegetable juice with a little fruit in it here and there, but really you don't need to overdo them. And one of the things that I think is the problem with the juice bars is the fact that they give these huge numbers of ounces of them. If they would do smaller, more controlled, like 4 to 6 ounce juices instead of these large ones, that would be helpful too. Millet. Millet is the highest goitrogen food that there is, and when you cook millet, the goitrogens do not reduce, they actually increase. So this is a little bit of an issue for us when we're taking wheat out of the diet. Millet is one of those grains that is used as a replacement in a lot of the gluten-free foods out there. So we want to watch that we don't over intake the millet. It's usually in with a blend of other grains like amaranth and rice flour and now potato starches and tapioca starches and things like that. But what I would counsel clients if they had a lot of strong low thyroid symptoms and low thyroid labs is don't just out and out eat like a millet cereal. So be aware of that. Okay, that's it for goitrogens. Now, what about the issue of helping out the thyroid by making sure to take in the nutrients that the body needs to make thyroid and to convert T4 to T3? Well, we use this strategy for sure, but there are a couple of cautions on this as well. So this is just a review of all the nutrients that we need to make thyroid hormone. First of all, tyrosine is the amino acid that is the backbone of the thyroid molecule. And it gets attached to iodine molecules, and that's what the basic structure of iodine or of thyroid hormones are. Then you need selenium and other trace minerals that work with these enzymes that are called the deiodinase enzymes that take off one of those iodine molecules to convert the T4, which is like the stored form of thyroid hormone. It stores in the gland itself and in the liver, and then it gets converted to T3 as we have adequate nutrients to do so. Zinc is a key trace mineral that's also always mentioned, almost always in relation to thyroid hormone production. It affects it in an indirect way by helping our insulin sensitivity, and also just because zinc is so key for any production of any protein molecule in the body, including, thyroid hormones. Chromium is also listed as key. Copper is actually needed for tyrosine metabolism, but if you get too much copper, it can block zinc and therefore be antagonistic to thyroid hormone production. So that's always a little bit of a balance that we have to do there. Manganese. If your body can be making manganese or making thyroid hormones, but if you don't have that trace mineral manganese, you can't transport it. So it's key for transportation. And magnesium is often listed as a nutrient that's important for thyroid hormone production because, again, it influences insulin sensitivity. And also, a lot of people don't realize if our calcium elevates, that's what causes our parathyroid gland to kick in, and then our thyroid production downregulates. So magnesium helping to keep that key critical balance between those nutrients there. And then all these other nutrients are kind of ancillary things, but they all really do play a role. There are B vitamins that play various roles in these processes. There's a sodium pump that's important for when thyroid hormones are made. We pump sodium in and out with thyroid hormone production and conversion. You need vitamin C for that sodium pump, apparently. There are other nutrients that can be ancillary to good thyroid activity, such as the adaptogenic herbs that are really wonderfully valuable for helping to control the stress response in the body. So adaptogens like rhodiola and ashwagandha, astragalus, these are a lot of times you'll see adaptogenic herbs in thyroid supplement blends because they know that stress response plays such a role in increasing the production of RT3 instead of the active T3 that we want. And then in our practice, we use, there's a real key nutrient that we use for autoimmune thyroid, and that's Moducare, which is a product that's primary ingredients are plant sterols and sterolins. And there's a ton of study on that ingredient, and it is wonderful for down-regulating that Th2 immune response and rebalancing that Th1 to Th2 teeter-totter that I showed you the slides on. So we always use Moducare in autoimmune thyroid, people with autoimmune thyroid. So in the Metabolic Code program, we have put together a blend of nutrients that are in our product called Thyrostasis that contains all the key nutrients that we need to make thyroid hormones. So it contains a nice absorbable form of chromium, selenomethionine, which is the best form to take selenium in, some tyrosine itself, a little bit of bladderwrack to be a source of the actual iodine. Bladderwrack is a seaweed that's high in iodine. It's brown seaweed, the fucus, it's also called. And then we have ashwagandha and rhodiola, so those are our two adaptogenic herbs that we put in there. And then there's Coleus forshicoli, which is an herb that stimulates cyclic AMP production, which in turn stimulates thyroid hormone production. And there's a little bit of alpha-lipoic acid in there. So remember I said that some people are looking to cysteine and measuring that as a substance important for thyroid hormone. The reason is the cysteine supports the production of PGC1 alpha, which is needed for GLUT4 proteins and supporting that whole insulin sensitivity and driving that cellular ability to get glucose into the cells and drive that machinery that thyroid hormones are relying on. to, drive that ATP production. So alpha lipoic acid is in there because it supports, it's a source for cysteine. It also supports metallothionein production, and I'll explain why that's important here in just a minute. But PGC1 alpha is a co-activator of thyroid hormone receptors. So alpha lipoic kind of helps get that machinery going. So when we're looking to assess and address thyroid support, our process is that we conduct, that full lab panel. We address other areas of metabolic imbalance, and if the thyroid hormones are low or trending low and there are no antibodies, we give a supportive nutrient blend first. And the reasoning behind this is that we try to avoid going on thyroid hormone if possible. If we can get the body to make its own thyroid, that's always the best choice. And if supplying all of those important nutrients for a few months and we don't see enough symptomatic reduction and we don't see those labs improve quite enough, then we will go to giving the thyroid production, or the thyroid prescription. Furthermore, if we, what you need to be aware of is if people have thyroid hormones that are trending low, but they have antibodies, they do have thyroid antibodies, it's really not good to give too much iodine. Giving iodine just really does promote the production of thyroid hormone, which you don't want in an autoimmune person because their immune system is attacking that thyroid hormone. So what is better to do in those cases, if you give any iodine at all, very low dose, pretty low dosage, and make sure that you give selenium along with it, because that helps protect against the problem from too much iodine. They just know this is a combination that exacerbates autoimmune thyroid, so it's best just to stay away. In most autoimmune thyroid cases, we do not give thyrostasis, for example. We don't give iodine, but we would give selenium. So, or you can instruct the client on, trying to get good dietary sources of selenium, but we just feel better making sure to give it in supplement form. So in that case, we would give just selenium and not a blend of thyroid hormone nutrients. Okay, so the summary so far, what you do for thyroid hormone and the diet that is helpful to optimal thyroid function is we make sure to address other metabolic factors such as insulin resistance. So in diet, what we do for that is we take the glycemic load down. If we have autoimmunity present, it's super important to take the food allergens out of the diet, do an elimination diet, and be aware that we need to preserve and protect gut health by not just the low allergen component, but by taking probiotics and making sure we're getting sources of resistant starch. Oh, and I missed in my summary, don't do all raw foods when we're eating high vegetables and plant foods, cooking, and watch the millet. Okay, so that's our summary so far. So what else impacts thyroid? Well, one big thing that impacts thyroid are pesticides that are in foods. So this is one of the reasons why the metabolic code diet, we emphasize trying to do organically grown and or sustainably grown foods whereby they're not treated with a lot of the pesticides and chemicals. For one, with organic foods, we're getting better nutrient intake, and that's going to just help make sure that we're getting all the nutrients that we need for thyroid hormone production, among other things in the body. But we want to make sure we're limiting our intake of pesticides. There are the studies are really elucidating what goes on. So we know that a lot of these pesticides will halt or stimulate hormone production. For example, phthalates that stimulate like estrogens, which again, remember I said excess estrogen is bad for thyroid, and because it increases thyroid binding globulin. So even that phthalates can have an influence on thyroid hormone. But the big thing is that the two main endocrine effects that are seen from the common chemicals that are used on foods is that they can induce insulin resistance and they can disrupt thyroid hormone activity. So those are the primary things that happen with pesticides in food. In fact, this study was amazing to me when I saw this a few years ago. They know that organochlorine pesticides, which is one of the big categories of pesticides, when you take them in, they store in your fat tissue. When you lose weight, when you go on a diet and your body's breaking down fat, it re-releases those pesticides. And then that can turn around and influence your ability to convert T4 and T3 and make active form of T3 hormone. So these authors in this study proposed that this could be one reason that people hit weight loss plateaus. They lose a few pounds and they stop losing. It could be from these pesticides. And this is where having good detox strategies can help people get off of these weight loss plateaus. And it's not just our produce, it's also pesticides that are showing up in meats and animal proteins. So this was a slide that I've reviewed before in other presentations that shows, you see the conventional foods that are signified by the C have much higher numbers of both categories of pesticides that they tested here, chlorinated hydrocarbons and then the organophosphate pesticides, compared to the organic versions had no organic phosphate pesticides and much lower chlorinated hydrocarbons than the conventionally raised. So these are just the references. And as you know, I love using the Environmental Working Group as a resource for checking up on what are the foods that are most heavily treated with pesticides. And if you don't buy all your foods organic, because I know it's expensive, if you can at least buy the ones that are most contaminated in the organic versions. And that's what I do. You know, asparagus is typically not got a lot of chemicals on it. I rarely buy organic asparagus, but I always buy organic apples and grapes and strawberries and celery, always. So, so this is the least contaminated. And we're running out of time, so I don't want to go into the details of these slides, but these are studies that showed that when they took kids, they did a study on kids, when they put them on organic foods and off of conventional, they compared the ones eating all organic to ones eating conventional. They had way higher levels of the organophosphate pesticides. And this is another one that showed when they removed the conventional foods and had children eat just organic, the organophosphate pesticide metabolites in urine went down. So it does show that taking those conventional foods out of the diet, those pesticide metabolites go down. So it does make a difference. One other issue I want to talk about is this issue of cadmium. Cadmium is a heavy metal that is ubiquitous in the environment. It is everywhere. It gets in air from smelting, and it's in ground from when the metal refineries that process these heavy metals, when they do the smelting process for steel, cadmium gets launched into the air, and then it settles down and gets on the ground, and then when it rains it gets carried down into the soil. There are all kinds of sources and ways that it gets into the environment, so it's really everywhere. Cadmium is death to thyroid. And I really think this is one of the reasons that we have so many people with thyroid symptoms today. I think a lot of it could be just from this heavy metal that's everywhere in the environment. So if you want to watch, there are certain foods that are known to have higher amounts of cadmium. It's hard to get away from it in the environment itself, but you can try to watch foods that contain higher amounts. But if you look, it's like seaweed, fish, seafood, chocolate. I mean, it's hard to avoid these foods. Same with, there are even our cereals and cereal grains. We don't have a lot of those in our diet, but vegetables, we have a ton of those. We have a lot of nuts and beans, some starchy root vegetables, and of course animal proteins. So it's just kind of hard to really stay away from it. But what you can do is have a mind toward protecting against the absorption. And what they know helps this is taking other nutritional minerals that we do need, taking complexes of minerals, good multi-mineral products, and making sure that our intake, especially of selenium, we know we have to watch iron, but selenium and zinc and these other minerals that we're getting adequate amounts. Also, interestingly, there are a couple of studies showing that certain foods are protective, like blueberries and any foods that contain quercetin. And of course, you can do quercetin supplementation. Apples and onions are good sources of quercetin. And metallothionein is protective. And what upregulates metallothionein in humans is alpha-lipoic acid. So there again, alpha-lipoic acid is a very thyroid-friendly nutrient in a lot of ways. So let me wrap up here, but I just want to summarize quickly the ways that we help support thyroid health are doing things to improve insulin sensitivity, taking out food allergens, using organic foods, watching goitrogens, not doing too many raw foods, and a little bit of alpha-lipoic acid on the side, and quercetin and blueberries to help try to battle that cadmium issue, along with good multi-mineral can be helpful as well. So our metabolic code diet materials are on our lifestyle guidance portal, and it walks people through different phases of the diet, phase 1 and phase 2 and then phase 3, and all the information is contained in the materials on the site. It's a very easy sign up. You just enter a name and an email. You pick a 1,500 or 1,800 calorie level for females and males respectively. The patients can use the tracking devices on the website as much as they want. And it's all put together for you. So really, the metabolic code diet has got a ton of features that make it a very thyroid-friendly diet. But I've never just really focused on why these features were good for thyroid, and so that's why I wanted to go through this tonight. Talked about the diet for re-regulating insulin and for gut health and for a lot of things, but we hadn't yet focused on thyroid. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you got good information tonight from me. And next time we're going to go through carb counting. This is a really simple way to help people understand what's built into the metabolic code for carb control. How to do it, what it is, what it does for you. And the reason I like to talk about carb counting is because, in clinical practice, not every single person that comes through my doors gets the metabolic code diet. There are a number of reasons why I don't just jump into it. Some people, it's an awful lot. They can be overwhelmed by it. And I just want to do something simpler and but yet that will have a big impact on their health and give them success. And so sometimes I'll say, well, let's not worry about doing the whole kit and caboodle. Let's just focus on controlling carbs. to help you lose weight, help get your cholesterol down, you know, all those types of issues. So we'll go through that next time. And I'll be happy to take questions for if anybody has them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. We'll give just a couple moments for some more questions to come through. First, is low protein dairy allowed, like grass-fed butter and heavy cream?
Oh, good question. I'm not as big a fan for the heavy cream part, but definitely butter. Yes. If you know how, you know, butter is made from the fat, just the fat that's in dairy, there are trace levels of proteins that come along with that in the buttermilk solids. But yes, butter is very, very low in the caseins and casomorphins, and therefore, most people will not trigger an immune response. It can trigger an immune response in very, very sensitive cases, and like in autistic kids or spectrum disorder children. So those are the only times when we don't, when butter doesn't seem to work. And then also, if you have people that want to do, that are a little more sensitive, you can go another step, and instead of using butter, you can use ghee, because ghee, they separate out all the buttermilk solids. So it's even lower trace amounts, very, very minute, if any, of the proteins. But cream, I think you get a little too much still. So I usually have people switch to something besides a cream, like in their coffee. I have them use coconut milk or almond milk or something.
Okay, I don't see many questions. Are the slides posted? No, they're not. That's why we record the presentations and post those on the blog. So the entire presentation is provided on metaboliccode.com/blog. So please take a look there. Within 24 to 48 hours, I will have that edited and posted for you. And we have some thank yous. So we look forward to seeing everyone at the next webinar, Laura's next webinar, which I will post on the calendar towards the end of the month. And if you're not already a Metabolic Code subscriber, we'd love to have you at the January 20th Metabolic Code System demo hosted by A4M. And you can register for that on our events page, metaboliccode.com/events. Thanks so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for attending. Hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, Libby. Good night, everyone.